Welcome to Ask the Horse Live. I'm your host, Michelle Anderson, Digital Managing Editor of The Horse. Tonight's topic is surviving natural disasters with your horse. Wow, what a summer. Back when we scheduled this event, we hadn't been through hurricanes and wildfires yet this year. But as we speak, smoke from the local wildfires in my area are heavy in the air. Thankfully, my office no longer smells like campfire. However, if you step outside, the smoke can make it hard to breathe. My horses are coping with it, but they've been depressed and they've had snotty noses and goopy eyes for weeks, and I haven't been able to get much riding in. Meanwhile, horse owners in Texas, Florida, and the Caribbean are dealing with the aftermath of Hurricanes Irma and Harvey. These events are good reminders of how important planning is when it comes to our horses in disaster. To help us out tonight, we're joined by Dr. Rebecca McConico of Louisiana Tech University. We are also expecting Dr. Eric Davis, who has been delayed, but we're hoping that he will be joining us shortly. So until Dr. Davis gets here, we're going to go ahead with Dr. McConico. So welcome, Dr. McConico.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. And I just want to have a huge wish out there for speedy recovery for everyone dealing with the fire and the hurricane disasters, and that we're sending heartfelt thoughts and prayers from Louisiana.
Yeah. So let's start with your involvement with natural disasters, veterinary care, and taking care of these horses and getting them evacuated during disasters. Where did your interest start, and what has your work focused on?
Well, the focus interest started probably right around 2000 when I made my way back to LSU to work, and was confronted with a tropical storm. Allison is actually very similar to how the Harvey storm went through. A couple of years later, then we had Katrina, Rita, Gustav Ike, we had Hurricane Isaac, the Gulf oil spill, last year's big flood. So it doesn't seem like things are getting any easier climate-wise for the population. And Katrina was such a disruptive situation for all of us. And it was a great opportunity at LSU with the support of the faculty and the deans there, and the veterinary population there, that we needed more training, we needed more involvement. As veterinarians are looked upon as leaders in their own communities, and disasters occur locally, the FEMA's not there waiting for them to happen. You're there locally with your own families, your own community, and we just felt that this was really important. We integrated it into the curriculum at LSU. We merged it with collaborations with other veterinary schools and other groups, national groups, local groups, and we've just kept it rolling, and it seems to be very popular and been a really worthwhile thing to focus my career on.
Okay. And did we maybe have Dr. Davis join us?
Yeah, I'm back.
Hi, Dr. Davis. This is Michelle. We were just doing introductions. Dr. McConico was telling everyone about her experience dealing with natural disasters with horses. So you're from UC Davis. Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in evacuation planning and natural disasters with our horses?
Sure. I had a former position with the Humane Society of the United States, and I was deployed to Katrina and some other national disasters that they were involved in. And then when I came to Davis, I went to work for Dr. Madigan, John Madigan's International Animal Welfare Training Institute. And our mission is training students, veterinarians, and first responders, perhaps most importantly, in tactical animal rescue and disaster preparedness. So that's kind of my background in the field. I suppose I had a rather close encounter with it this year with the rains that we had in California, and at one point we had our trailer hooked up and everything ready to evacuate because they were worried about the Oroville Dam failing. So I can tell you that this can happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we've already touched a little bit on the hurricanes and wildfires that have been happening, but Dr. Davis, what other natural disasters, you mentioned a dam and possible flooding, what other natural disasters should we be preparing with our horses, depending on our region?
Well, I think, of course, here in California, we do have earthquakes, and that is the disaster for which you will have the least amount of opportunity to prepare. So basically, having the sort of same things in place as far as food, shelter, water, that kind of thing, basic first aid. At least here on the west coast of the continent, is probably something that we ought to be thinking about.
Okay. Well, I want to give everyone a quick review of our Ask the Horse Live format. We're going to be talking about natural disasters and our horses for the next hour. We're going to start with the questions that everyone submitted during registration. If you have questions that you'd like to ask live, and I know there's a lot of you out there, we've had a record registration for this event, or if you would like clarification on a response, you can go ahead and enter that in the chat window in front of you if you're listening via your computer. We're going to do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. And this first question is for both of you. And Dr. Davis, you can respond first, then Dr. McConico. But Roberta in Lexington, Kentucky wants to know, why should people donate cash instead of sending stuff to disaster zones? And I think this is a really important question because we're all watching what's happening in certain areas and wanting to help. So Dr. Davis, what are your recommendations?
Well, since this was a huge problem with the Katrina response, I can certainly speak to this. There's a couple of things that sending product supplies. There's a couple of problems that causes. One is that it ties up transportation because you have to haul the stuff in. Second of all, there tends to be a mismatch between what is donated and what is actually needed. And then what happens is you start having large piles of supplies that get in the way of rescue and sheltering that you then have to deal with. And if some of those supplies are things like, for instance, dog food or perhaps grain in the case of horses, what you do is you promote a rodent problem very rapidly. And so just giving money is by far and away the best way to do it. Now, there's certainly things like hay and whatnot that might need to be transported from a distant area, but that's best organized when the agencies running the response have money to pay for it.
And Dr. McConico, do you have anything to add, and maybe some recommendations on different places where people can donate, say, and know that their money is going to go to the right places?
Just a couple of things to add. I completely agree with Dr. Davis on that. Another mention on the aspect of food storage. So we know, for sheltering, there needs to be food and grain and things for the small and large animals. However, there has to be, as he said, a place to store that, and it really needs to be climate controlled, or you will get the rat problem, the rodent problem, but the food will actually spoil very quickly, especially in conditions where there's a lot of flooding and just where there's not climate control. Another aspect is people are so well meaning, and those thoughts and those urgent messages that people need to hear of great comfort are wonderful, but all the stuff that comes along with it then needs to be sorted, and you don't know what's in the boxes, and it ties up personnel as well. So I know it sounds like a cold statement to say, please just send money, but that's truly what needs to happen. As far as who to donate to, I can't even give a list. However, I would say find out who's in charge of the response and give to those organizations that have that reputation and that are engaged in the actual response. And a lot of times just giving locally, if it's within your own your own community, to give locally in that way. I know a lot of communities have memorandums of understanding with some of the larger national groups, and those are wonderful organizations to help support. And if I start listing them, I'm going to miss people, so I'm not going to do that.
Okay. Dr. McConico, our next question is from you, and it's from Diana in Camas, Washington. Camas, Washington is located near the Eagle Creek fire that's going down the Columbia Gorge. It's where a lot of the smoke in my area is coming from. She wants to know if a 3-day supply of food applies to our horses. And then how do you figure out how much is 3 days worth, and how do you store it, especially if you need to possibly evacuate like she might?
Okay, another great question. And again, it's just going to depend on what resources that community has and what sort of networking is able to happen in that neighborhood community, or that farming community or horse community. It's really a tough. It's tough to put a number on it. We say now 3 to 7 days, and I'm seeing more like 7 to 10 days. Of that sort of, those sorts of supplies. So if you have space to store it, just stay stocked up as much as you can. And they really just need hay and water. I know the whole feed thing, but the hay is what's gonna be the most important item, along with fresh water, and trying to keep it, a good source of fresh water is important. There was a question about on that one how to store it. We'll just try to store it where it doesn't get wet or contaminated in any way, and work with the network with your neighbors to work together on those sorts of things.
Dr. Davis, our next question is for you, and it's from Kay, who sent in her email via email. She wants to know, where is the safest place for your horse during a thunderstorm with profuse lightning?
Oh my gosh. Not out in an open field.
Yeah.
You're better off in some sort of protected area where you have something that is going to take the lightning if it does come very close. In the Midwest, the burns that we used to have in Iowa and so forth all had their lightning rods on the top of the building and that sort of thing. Being in an area where lightning is more likely to hit that than a lone horse standing out in a field would probably be your best bet. But I don't really know if I've got recommendations beyond that, unfortunately.
Okay. And in my area, because we get these big lightning strikes too, and the secondary problem with that are the wildfires that start from the lightning strikes.
Sure.
So I think that that's something for people to be aware of. We had a big lightning storm, thunderstorm, not too long ago, and had a wildfire started about 2 or 3 miles from my neighborhood, and it got stamped out really quickly because people were really quick to report it. But that's another concern with those lightning storms. I like our listener, just never know quite what the right thing to do is with those. Our next question is for Dr. McConico. It's from Kathy in California. And Kathy wants to know if it's true that it's safest to leave a horse out in the open during a strong windstorm.
I would give the same answer as Dr. Davis did on the lightning. I think the safest thing is to have them in a sturdy shelter of some sort, a sturdy barn or area, because flying debris can be really dangerous. So, if you only have pastures, then that's going to be another situation. But trying to put them in an area of the pasture, say if there's a hill, to try to protect them from, say, straight line winds. But again, there's not a really good answer for that either.
Dr. McConico, in these areas that have had hurricane force winds, I'm curious about the ag buildings. Do certain ag buildings seem to fare better, ones that have more engineering than others? Is there any rhyme or reason to the barns that stay standing?
I think the ones that have really sturdy roofs, and of course, the more expensive ones that have that are going to be your safest bet for that. But then you have the hurricane with the storm surge is probably the most dangerous aspect of that, and just truly getting the animals evacuated out of those locations is what's recommended. Leaving them in those high risk areas is just not, it's not a good thing. It won't have a good outcome.
Dr. Davis, our next question is for you. It's from Deborah, who's in Los Angeles. Wants to know, if I have to shelter in place during a wildfire, how do I minimize the amount of smoke my horses breathe in?
Well, if you live in an area, like Southern California, of course, which is prone to that kind of wildfire, coming close to places where people keep horses, having a lot of defensive space around your property is probably the best thing that you can possibly do, other than, as Rebecca said, just evacuating, before the air quality becomes an issue. Horses have an enormously robust filtering system in their nose, and they're fairly resistant to short periods of time where you have poor air quality. Now, I'm not saying smoke inhalation isn't a problem, but smoke inhalation is what you get in a stable fire, or when a horse is right in the middle of the fire. If you can keep the fire far enough away so that all you're getting is particulate matter in the air and a smoky smell and that kind of stuff, for a period of several days to a week, that isn't going to hurt a horse very badly.
Now, in our area, we had about 3 weeks of unhealthy levels of smoke in the air, and our local veterinarians were recommending not riding. Is that the same recommendations that you make in California?
Yeah,
is to not ride.
I would say that'd be true, because what happens with riding and exercise, you increase airflow, which sucks in more particulate matter and smoke particles and that kind of stuff. So yeah, certainly restricting exercise would make sense.
Dr. Davis, we have another question from you. This is the one's from Beverly in Louisiana. She wants to know, what is the best way to attach visible ID to a horse in the event of a disaster, and why would that be important?
Well, certainly if it's a disaster where you're not the person that's doing the evacuation, or the animal has to go to a shelter without a known owner, I mean, that's absolutely critical. I mean, having animals in shelters where the owner is not known is a real big problem. There are all kinds of ingenious methods. These collars that they put on the necks of brood mares is one possibility. Another method is to take a pair of clippers with number 40 blade on it and clip your name and phone number in the hair on the side of the horse's neck. I mean, the hair is going to grow back, but that is a marker that won't get lost. Another possibility in a pinch is to get some good sticky duct tape or elasticon bandage. Put it on your horse's mane and write your name and phone number on it with a Sharpie.
Okay. And Dr. McConico, do you have any other thoughts on IDing horses? And I'm curious, when you've been in these disaster situations, how frequently does it happen that horses are separated from their owners?
It happens a lot. I'm sure both Florida and Texas are right in the midst of dealing with that right now, in the fires, the folks in the fire areas. I mean, just some other things that we've seen and that seem to work. Ones that you can actually see from a helicopter, when you can see somebody's cell phone, to try to identify, so you don't have to get, ones that you can't access from the road. So we actually have used spray paint on the horse in big letters, and a cell phone number that's outside of the disaster area. So a family member or friend that's a contact outside, because the cell phone lines get jammed, and maybe the owner's in a shelter somewhere. So that's just another option. There's all sorts of different ways, carving something into their foot, but then, well, not their foot, but their hoof, and then it's difficult when they're in the mud to see those. So this way, it's something big that you can see. And again, over a few weeks, that's going to go. It's going to rub off or whatever. And the idea with the clippers works really well. It's but it takes a little while to do it. I don't know if you've actually tried to put a phone number with clippers in where you can actually read it. It's a little challenging, but hey. If you've got a good set of clippers that'll work, then that's great.
Yeah. So, Dr. McConaughey, when these horses are separated from their humans and you go to try to find or collect your horse, are there any procedures that are in place to make sure that the right horse is matched back up with the correct owner?
Yeah, well, we try to have those in place, and in Louisiana we have mandatory microchipping, and that helped us tremendously in Katrina, after Katrina, and that we were able to match those up eventually. Of course, those had to be matched up with the Coggins papers at the state level, so it wasn't like you could log in somewhere and type in the chip number. But if those animals are registered along with having the chip, that's really probably the best way. But most of the time, the owners need to have ID of some sort on their animal, such as pictures and their Coggins papers. The passport Coggins papers work really well now. That's all electronically stored. And then, just having as much information as you can on your animal. But, that I can say firsthand, last year in the flood in Baton Rouge area, we had several owners claiming that this was their animal, and at some time in the history they each owned the animal. So whoever had the most up to date information.
Yeah. So, Dr. Davis, yeah. What are your experiences with putting horses back with their owners?
Microchip everything.
Okay.
I mean, I'm serious. I'm serious. There's no reason to not have. I mean, all my horses, all my donkeys are microchipped, and you just have to do that. I mean, that's basically the solution when it all shakes out.
Yeah,
I'm gonna write that down because mine are not microchipped. So
microchip them.
I'm gonna put that on my to-do list. I'm sure there's lots of people out listening who are gonna do the same. Dr. Davis, can you explain a little bit about how a horse is microchipped? And how an owner would
it's an extraordinarily simple procedure. It's doesn't take really any kind of medication or sedation or anything like that. And we even microchip horses where we do research and so forth in places like Nicaragua, where these horses have really not been handled very much, and it's easy to do. It's just it's a tiny little piece of metal that emits a micro signal, and it's placed right kind of under the mane in the nuchal ligament, which is a large ligament that runs along the top of the horse's neck. You just stick a needle in there and press a little plunger. The microchip comes out. They heal up like $1 million, and it's really simple and inexpensive to do.
Do brands help at all, Dr. Davis, or is it too hard to track who they belong to? I'm thinking of my friends who has a gelding that has 4 different brands on him, so he might have one of those situations with 4 different people claiming him.
Well, I would, something like that. I mean, what you would need to do is have a record of the fact that horse has these brands on it, and frankly, taking a picture of the horse and the brands would be ideal. I mean, if it has 4 different brands on it, that is going to kind of identify the horse too. Mm-hmm. So that would be the way to do it. Just make sure you have a record.
Dr. McConaughey, the next question is for you, and we actually got several questions about halters. This one in particular is from Margaret in Elk Grove, California. She wants to know what kind of halter is best to use when sheltering in place, and I'm just going to assume from her location that she's actually talking about because of fires.
Well, we would recommend a type of halter that's called like a breakaway halter. So it has because the nylon halters, they're tough, and that's where horses will get injured. If it under pressure, if it catches on something. And so there are halters that have like a leather strap that's not woven, but that's going to break under pressure, or even Velcro. And you can even make your own nylon halters into a breakaway halter by using Velcro or tie it with secure it with something. Of course, they may lose a halter, along the way. And so having the ID on them is going to be really important that's on their body. But that's probably the safest thing, because many animals will get hung or stuck, with a halter. As they're, out in the, in a disaster situation.
Okay. Dr. Davis, the next question is for you. It's from Star in Bedford, Ohio. And she wants to know if you have any specific suggestions for horse owners who board their horses and may not have full control over the animal during a disaster.
Well, microchip it. Sorry to harp on that subject, but that would be a start. The other thing would be, and I have boarded my own horses at places. I would make sure that I would inquire of the person that I'm boarding the horse at how they would handle a disaster, what their plan is for anything from a stable fire to a flood, to any of that sort of thing, and make sure that they have multiple phone numbers where they could reach you in an emergency, and again, kind of work with them to make sure that there is some kind of a plan for disaster.
Okay. So, Dr. Davis, I used to work at a therapeutic riding center, and as part of our accreditation process, we had to have a disaster plan in place and an evacuation plan, and we had to run drills with that, like how we could get enough trailers on the property to get the horses out in a certain amount of time. That's not something that when I've been at boarding facilities I've ever heard anyone talk about. Is it the facility owner's responsibility to evacuate the horse, or is it the horse owner's responsibility to evacuate the horse?
It's the horse owner's responsibility, as far as I know. Now, I guess I don't know whether or not there are different laws in different states, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if there are different laws in different localities within states. I will say that I know of counties in California where basically the boarding stables have gotten together, developed a plan similar to the one that you're discussed for the therapeutic riding group, had people on call for transport, have an agreement for a place to which they would transport the horses, and the transporters all had liability coverage as well. And that takes a little bit of effort, but we as equine professionals have a little bit of an obligation to our community to make sure that sort of thing is available.
I think in Louisiana, let me just add to that real quick. In Louisiana, I know there are a lot of boarding facilities that have that written in their agreements, their border agreements, and they're not all the same. They, sometimes it's the horse owner, sometimes it's the boarding facility. But it is something I think super important for people to figure out what is the plan. Where can they help with that?
Yeah. So, as vets, what are your recommendations to people who have more horses than they have horse trailer space? How do you triage and make the decisions on which horses get out first, or how to get the other horses out? Dr. Davis, do you want to start?
Yeah, again, a tough question. I almost have that problem myself. Once again, I think this speaks to the importance of community planning for disasters. And, we're all horse people and cowboys and whatnot, and we want to be able to take care of ourselves and, do things our way. And veterinarians as a profession, particularly those of my older generation, are particularly bad in that sense. but it's time that we kind of got together and got with our own local communities, so that if Russell Ranch down the road from me, boarding 50 horses, and just to pick a number, there's 5 horse trailers there. Other people in the community need to be willing to step up to help them out, because at some point, Allison there at Russell Ranch may be the person that you're sending your horses to when they need to be sheltered. And I think that's the solution to that problem is a community plan and a realization that these things are going to happen and we ought to be prepared for them.
Dr. McConico, did you have anything to add?
I just think the message is community planning and working together. The other thing is, if it's a smaller farm, there's not a community, and you're talking a family situation, and you have a 2-horse trailer and 4 horses. During when the disaster is actually happening, and as you're trying to evacuate, that's not the time to decide. The time to decide is in between the disasters. Decide who gets to go first, and then basically whoever can load the quickest is going to get to go. So, just have those conversations with your family and try to get that sorted out ahead of time.
Yeah. And have a plan about where you're going to go to as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where you need to go, I'm guessing, just depends on what kind of disasters are prevalent in your area. I know in my area with wildfire, I have a friend who lives on the opposite end of town, away from the kind of forest that I live in. She lives near a different kind of forest, and so we would evacuate to each other's properties first. But what about places like in Louisiana with hurricanes? How far do you have to go to evacuate safely, Dr. McConico?
Well, that's a great question, and that actually happened to me personally with my daughter's horse back in Gustav. And so Gustav was followed by Ike, and we actually evacuated to where Ike went in, not knowing Ike was going there. So luckily we were fine. But yeah, you got to go north if there's a hurricane. Well, at least from our state. And usually, the I-10 corridor, you got to go up to I-20. And so we have designated shelters along there. And I think people in Louisiana have been through it so many times. They kind of have their people now. They have their partners. You said your friend 10 miles away. They probably have the 10-mile friend, the 50-mile friend, the 100-mile friend. Depending on the seriousness of the hazard that's happening or going to happen.
Yeah. So, Dr. McConico, in these evacuation situations, I know in veterinary medicine and horse management, we're always talking about biosecurity and quarantines. Does all of that just kind of go out the window when you're trying to get horses to safety?
Well, it depends. If it's a group of people that that have that concern, so let's pick Coggins testing. And people say, well, you're not going to be able to bring your horse to my facility unless they have a negative Coggins test. Well, that all depends. A lot of times they'll throw those out the window, but then they need to, if it's going to be a shelter situation for weeks or several weeks at a time, then those horses do need to get a Coggins test, because the risk goes up the longer they're all together, and they're untested potential reservoirs. So I would say, asking me, somebody that does internal medicine and biosecurity, I try to keep that in mind and help advise and help people keep the animals separated that are sick once they get to a shelter. The ones that have snotty noses and the fevers and the diarrhea, those guys go down this aisle and have lots of PPE, and then the other, personal protective gloves and things, and then the others can go the other way. And then they need to all have physical exams eventually. So, it depends on the urgency, really, and the situation. Eventually, the biosecurity gets handled and gets taken care of.
We have a question from our live audience. Gab is listening, and Gab wants to know, Dr. Davis, what equipment or who has the equipment necessary to read microchips?
I would say most small animal practices do now. I would think of virtually all animal control offices, county animal control would have microchip readers. And although not all equine veterinarians might have them, I would think that most referral centers, in other words, places where horses get hospitalized and might get more sophisticated surgery and diagnostics, that they would have those available. And once again, if your county animal control for some reason does not, it might be the sort of thing that the local 4-H club or some other group might get together and take up a collection and spend $50 on a microchip reader.
Dr. Davis and Dr. McConico, I think this is a question that you both might have responses to. But Eric is in Park City, Utah, and Eric is in the veterinary profession and wants to know, as an educator, how can he better improve his disaster planning seminars that he gives to horse owners? Dr. McConico?
I can take that one. I guess the thing that has seemed to work the best for us is to get together with the community again, and work through actual scenarios and work through a worksheet of what are the resources in your community. I think it's really important to include the animal control officers or the sheriff's department, whoever is the designated in charge of animals in a community. So they would come into the role. They play a role in emergency management, and they're the ones that can really help facilitate and help work with the first responders. And they really, it's just a matter of networking and pulling it all together. The other thing that's helped is that, make it fun, involve the kids. They make great high school projects, like for FFA, kids in 4-H, pony clubs, to put these kind of seminars together, bring their parents, the kids get excited about what's our plan and kind of gets a little enthusiasm into the family, and they can usually come up with some really helpful planning situations to build community capacity and build community resilience.
Are there any resources for education materials or seminar materials, either from the universities or extension agencies, that you could recommend?
Well, I can recommend the AAP's website. They have some really great, they have an evacuation kit. They have that whole list. They've got a lot of resources there. In fact, I think UC Davis is the one that submitted that, because I was just looking at that earlier today. It's just a one-page bullet point list that's really handy and quick, a quick reference. And yeah, most of the ag centers in the different, the different universities, the land-grant institutions, and the ag agents, there's a whole lot of information available. The publication coming out of the AVMA, Saving the Whole Family, that's a really great resource as well. And those are online. You can print your own. You can customize it for your community. So yeah, there are a lot of resources available.
And Dr. Davis, do you have any resources there in California for people on the West Coast?
Yeah, the Center for Equine Health here at UC Davis did a pamphlet about 2 years ago now that is available, and if somebody wanted to either contact the Center for Equine Health or contact me at the International Animal Welfare Training Institute, we could get them that information. I suspect it's online, but I'm not 100% sure of that. The other thing that I'd also suggest is there is going to be a symposium on disaster preparedness and animals, not entirely skewed to large animals, but to some extent. It's going to be kind of heavy on that here in October at the University of California at Davis, and there will be proceedings as a result of that meeting. So you might just watch the UC Davis website for the availability of that.
Okay. Dr. McConaughey, our next question is for you. It's from Terry in New Mexico. And Terry wants to know, what if I cannot get my horse to load in the trailer during an evacuation?
That's a tough one. It happens a lot, and it basically means that horse is going to get left behind. And so definitely microchip the horse. Have that, there's another tip for that. Get them microchipped and then leave them in an area where they have access to hay and fresh water. If they, if you can have an area where they can stay under in a sheltered environment, that's probably the best, but you don't want to lock them in a stall. We had so many horses drown in their stalls after Katrina. And I know Texas is dealing with that, obviously Florida probably too. We hope we've learned our lessons from that, but I guess until you see it firsthand, it's one a lot of people just don't think about. So, but leaving those provisions, if there are people that are going to stay in the area and you're evacuating, if you can let your neighbor know. Some people just absolutely refuse to leave, and heck, if they're going to stay back, maybe they could look in on your horse for you.
Yeah, and if you will allow me a brief pet peeve, if there's a single thing that you're going to do to protect your horse in the disaster, that is to get them good at loading. Mm-hmm. And I know that isn't something that happens overnight. I know that it can be difficult. I know that horses can develop phobias and problems with loading. But any horse I have, when I open the back of a trailer and point at the trailer, they will walk in that trailer. And I don't use force. I don't use coercion. I don't use pain. I don't use any of that kind of stuff. You just spend time at it, and they'll all learn how to do it. And if there's one thing you can do for your horse, that's probably the most important. And I would also add that have other people load your horse too. Mm-hmm. So the old brownie, is afraid of man, or something. And I mean, that's fine, but that doesn't get you very far in a disaster. So go find some guy to load Brownie a bunch of times till Brownie realizes that it's not going to hurt him. Okay. It's pretty simple, but that is crucially important. And I put time in with my animals to make sure that they do that.
Oh. What recommendations do you have for owners who might be under stress and their horse that usually loads isn't going to?
Oh my God, yeah. I got a great story about that myself, but I won't abuse you with it. But that's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. That is so true. I mean, and I've had horses that loaded great until I was in a hurry or there was some problem, and they're like, I don't like this. There's something bad going on here. Mm-hmm. Again, as somebody who's, I don't know very much, but I spent a lot of time around horses in my 69 years. Sometimes it's a good idea when you feel stressed and you're concerned and everything like that to just stop, no matter what else is going on, take a deep breath, say your favorite mantra or whatever it is, and just calm yourself down before you get anywhere near the horse. I mean, that sounds silly, but that's worked for me.
While you guys have been responding to questions, my backup team has been posting some links. We actually at the Horse partnered with UC Davis a few years ago to create a natural disaster planning interactive page on our website, and that URL has been posted if you want to check that out if you're listening. It has some test questions that kind of take you through the process, thinking through evacuating your horse. Our next question is for Dr. Davis. Ann is in Pennsylvania, and Ann's question is, what do you do if you don't have a trailer? We've talked about community resources. What recommendations do you have for Ann?
And I guess it would depend a little. I mean, obviously, we've sort of gone over the community resources thing, and I mean, I think that's critical. Not only who's going to haul it, but where it's going to go. But if that's not, for some reason, absolutely not available, then then it depends a little bit on what sort of disaster you may be facing. And it also should affect your willingness to evacuate early. So if you're going to have to lead that horse, or you're going to have to find a place of safety if there's a flood or a fire, you're going to have to just be that much more sensitive, and you're going to have to accept the fact that you're probably going to move your horse with a false alarm every so often. There's no alarm as good as a false alarm. I love false alarms, but I think that would be, I think that would be your, I think that'd be your option.
Yeah. And I think it's important, even if you don't have a truck and trailer, that you learn how to drive a truck and trailer. I have,
oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, I have friends who rely on me, to transport their horses to trail ride or go to, shows or whatever. And I always try to encourage them to at least get in the driver's seat so we can go around some of the country roads. Mostly, so if something happens to me while we're trail riding, I know they can drive me to the hospital. But I recently also, my friend who I have kind of this disaster plan with, I drove her truck and I hadn't realized it was a stick. And so I can drive a manual transmission, but I think that it's always good to be prepared in those situations so that we can deal with them if they come up. So anyway, just a few tips from the horse owner side. Dr. McConico, we have a question for you. It's from Julia in Stillwater, Minnesota, and she wants to know if you could address the effects of standing in water for long periods of times for horses. What happens to the hooves, legs, and skin if our horses are in flooded areas?
Well, we've seen a lot of that, and I've seen a whole lot of pictures floating around on the internet. We had a lot from the flood from last year in Baton Rouge, and of course we've seen it for years and years. It's not something new. We just, I think, have more social networking, so we see these things, and basically what it happens is the skin becomes macerated, truly macerated, almost like a person with a bed sore. So it's a wet, the skin gets wet. Those several layers of the skin that provide protection under normal circumstances gets edematous, gets full of fluid, and then parts of that, it loses blood supply. That skin will flake off, and then sometimes deep ulceration will happen, and they will get infections. All that flood water, and the floodwaters have so many things in it that are nasty. The sewer, the organisms that are out there, the chemicals in the environment. And so that on top of skin without any barrier, they become infected. They can get deep skin infections. The hooves, if they lose blood supply, if those vessels get infected and they lose blood supply and get infection in their feet, they can founder or get laminitis. So we see that every year, and some horses can stand in water for several days, and they come out. You bathe them, get all that stuff off of them, and they do fine. But other horses, even 12 to 24 hours of standing in it, they've got that macerated skin, that water line that you see on these guys. So they can lose their life over it.
We have another resource for our listeners that just got posted in the chat box. If you're listening to us online, we've done editor's picks, our top 10 resources for disaster planning. If you're listening and not on the computer, you can go to thehorse.com later, thehorse.com/33474 will get you to that resource article. Dr. Davis, the next question is for you. It's from Linda in Midland, North Carolina. Linda is asking, what is the best way to permanently identify your animals? And actually, I think we've answered that. Do you want to give another plug for microchipping?
I'll give another plug for microchipping. Yeah, I think it absolutely is. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. McConico, our next question is from Gail, who's in Ontario, Canada. And Gail wants to know what you would recommend having in your quote-unquote evacuation kit for your horse.
Well, again, the things that you're posting currently are great resources, and I guess one of the first things is know where you're going. So have a resource where you're going to be taking your animal, have your first aid kit, your hay and water, halter, lead rope for each horse, buckets. Just you can just go down that list. I guess for people, I say basically you need fuel for you, your horse, and your vehicle. And those are having batteries and energy. You need to be able to see what you're doing. So having those cell phone chargers, those extra ones, and then that whole list of things that can go along with what goes in a first aid kit. And we could talk 2 or 3 more minutes on that, but I think people can have those resources, and those are great.
Well, Ken is in New York. He's in our live audience, and he wants to know what recommendations you would have for medical supplies to keep on hand for your horses. What are some basic first aid things that someone might want to have? And is it a good reason to keep your prescriptions up to date and have some in the cabinet?
Right. So bandage material is always important with some sort of tape. I mean, duct tape and towels can be used in a pinch if you don't have bandage material, but any of the salves, things to clean their legs, their body if they have any injuries. So basically your veterinarian's phone number, a veterinarian's phone number, some pain meds, fly spray. I guess, Eric, you can jump in here because I didn't make a list. That's sort of off the top of my head. So,
that's basically it. Probably having a little bit of some sort of mild disinfectant, chlorhexidine or providone iodine. I really like to have one of what they used to call a military compress bandage available because it is designed for stopping significant hemorrhage. So in other words, if you have a horse that should cut its lower leg in a trailer accident or something like that, and while everything else is going on, you can put that on good and tight. You won't hurt the horse's leg, and you'll stop the hemorrhage. So those kind of things are handy. It's not a bad idea to have and learn how to use a stethoscope, and have and learn how to use a thermometer. It's probably not something you're going to use in the instant of emergency, but if when you get to the sheltering site and your horse doesn't want to eat the next morning, you can get some very valuable information just with those 2 instruments.
We have
cheap and simple to use.
We have another question from our live audience. Maggie would like to know if you would recommend sheltering in place or evacuating during snow and ice storms. Neither one of you, I currently live in cold weather areas, but do you have any experience dealing with snow and ice? Dr. Davis, I think you mentioned you spent time in the Midwest.
Yeah, I was at Iowa State there for a while, and we work with a lot of clients of the Indian reservations in North and South Dakota. They're tougher than I am. I'm not sure I could survive a winter up there, but generally their approach when it's successful, and they've had some bad winters, is to make sure that you have hay placed in areas where you can easily get to it to make sure that you can keep your animals fed in really severely cold weather. Where they usually get into trouble is you have cold weather, you get a little bit of a thaw, and then you get a real cold snap, and you get that either an ice storm or all the snow turns to ice, and horses and cattle starve to death because nobody can get feed to them. Mm-hmm. So making sure that if that should happen, the animals are in a place where you can, either because you have the equipment or because they're placed close enough to the feed source, that you can keep them fed. Horses have an enormous ability to withstand cold. I mean, it's pretty darn amazing. what they can deal with. But they have to be fed and they need water.
Oh. Yeah, and in my area this last winter we had a really rough winter, and we had some ice where it was hard to even step outside without falling
Sure.
with ice, and it was really hard with the horses, just really scary because it's a slip and fall stuff with them if you don't have stalls to keep them in off the ice. But yeah, just kept hay in front of them, lots of hay anytime we could get out there. We wore yak tracks and snowshoes to feed
Oh, yeah.
so that we could get to them. And I just wish that there were snowshoes for the horses too, because it was really pretty scary with ice. So anyway, if you're listening live and you've dealt with ice and snow and you have suggestions for the ways you've coped with that, feel free to add that to our chat window and we can share some of those tips here before we're done in the next few minutes. Dr. Davis, our next question is for you, and it's from CC in Sugar Land, Texas. And CC wants to know if you have any recommendations for feeding horses during evacuations. I know that usually we don't want to change what horses are eating too quickly, but we may not have a choice if we're evacuating. Dr. Davis?
Yeah, having quality grass hay available is the main thing, because you can take a horse that's on like alfalfa and a high concentrate diet and switch them to grass hay, and they'll do quite well. Where you get into trouble is if you go the other direction. So if I was going to have a feed stuff available, it would be well cured, decent digestibility grass hay, because that's something that I can always feed to any horse and it will do okay.
Dr. McConico, I think our last question, we're just about to run out of time here tonight, but we have a question from Lori in Texas, and Lori has taken on a rescue horse from Hurricane Harvey, and she wants to know what recommendations you have for treating rain rot in that horse.
Okay, I guess I would have some more questions for Lori in Texas, and mainly to find out, is that a moderate, mild, or severe case, and is the horse a thin horse, and are there nutritional issues to address? But if we're just talking about rain rot, which is a bacterial skin condition that causes a lot of crusting over the back, up on the rump, and then down the legs. Most of the time, if you get those crusts off by gently bathing them with like a chlorhexidine or a betadine shampoo, so something with a detergent in it, and then get those crusts off and let it dry out, and then have that animal on a good plan of nutrition. Sometimes it's so severe they have secondary infection or some other things going on that need to be evaluated. So I would say make sure that horse is being evaluated by a veterinarian that can then help. But that's sort of the routine treatment that we recommend. I know there are a lot of things on the market that people like to use, a lot of things with oil or mineral oil in them, and I'm not a big fan of that. I'm a bigger fan of keeping it dry. But good luck with that horse and all those horses out there that are getting some extra care these days because of that.
We have a comment from Brenda in our live audience. She's saying that when she is dealing with ice, she recommends using stove ashes or manure to put on top for some traction. This year, I've actually ordered sand. I have sand because it's inorganic. It doesn't hold moisture, and that way I can spread sand over walkways to give my horses a little bit of traction, and myself, so that I can get out to feed them. With that, we are unfortunately out of time tonight. I want to thank Dr. Davis and Dr. McConico both for joining us and answering all of our questions.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy doing it.
I want to also thank everyone who submitted questions ahead of time, and those of you who listened live and submitted questions. I hope you can join us next month when we are discussing equine legal issues. Until then, from all of us here at The Horse, stay safe and have a great night.